What is happening? Coach Brad here. Today's training video is played on the streets of PKC. If you have not yet joined the fray, you can do so by heading to enhanceyouredge.com/PKC. Get your exclusive invite code to play. You got to have an invite code to play, so you may as well get one there. That'll be down below in the description bar and also as a comment. Today's video is going to feature Bombpots, how to more effectively play Bombpots, whether you're using, you're playing in them on PKC or in the live streets, brick and mortar casinos. Bombpots are a regular feature there as well. So get some insights on how to play these guys. They're big pots, they're big decisions, and they're decisions that can impact your session one way or the other. You can have a great session because you play well in Bombpots, or you can have a horrible session because you play poorly. Big decision points, not a ton of information out there on the internet. So let's jump right into the fray. All right, so jumping into some bomb pot action. I didn't have a chance to actually record the very first bomb pot that I played, and I've never played in bomb pots in my life. They're a relatively new thing to live poker. Haven't played a ton of live poker lately, and in the online realm, you just don't see it. So this is my very first hand, the 8-9 of diamonds. I was waiting to start recording until I got 3 tables, and unfortunately this hand happened. Could have been fortunately. Spoiler alert, not very fortunate. The people above me at PKC, by the way, I told them that I went broke in the first bomb pot that I ever played. They sent me a gif of Mr. Burns. Just how it goes in poker sometimes. Looking back at this hand, so we have the 8-9 of diamonds. Villain bets, and if you're unfamiliar with bomb pots, everybody puts in 8 big blinds, and then you see a flop and the action starts from there, right? So there's 1280 in the pot. It's a family pot, 8 players. Villain bets 2/3, and we have middle pair with a flush draw. So it's a pretty dicey spot anyway, but if Villain is betting with like the nut flush draw, then we can get it in with good equity. Even if Villain has like bottom 2 pair, so 7-9, we have a fair amount of equity in that case. No matter what Villain has, we do have some equity, and if we just flat the flop, there's going to be 2,800 in there heading into the turn, and we have 3,600 left. Facing an overbet shove is pretty disastrous for us, and if we hit our flush, then it's not very well disguised, so there's not any guarantee that we get paid. If, say, Villain has King 9 and the turn is the deuce of diamonds, is he just going to pay off on the turn and the river when we go bet? I don't know. So raising makes a lot of sense, just simplifies the process, makes it way easier to play. So we go ahead and raise, and if we ever have fold equity too, then that's a good thing. Like if Villain's betting is King X's, then okay, we get some fold equity to go along with our actual equity, and it makes the spot okay. But like I said, I went broke. Everybody made fun of me. Hooray team. Hooray team. Good to have friends in your corner who are always rooting against you in the poker field. Jack 10 off on the button here. And if you're wondering, as we go through this video, it's going to skip around because I edited out all the boring parts, which is something that I probably should have been doing, I don't know, years ago. But you live and you learn. You try to do better next time. That's what I'm doing. We open the Jack 10 off on the button to 130. Little small opening size. We could go bigger. The middle table is actually 10, 20, 40 with a 5 ante, compared to tables number 1 and number 3 that are 10, 20, 40 with a 10 ante. You may not think that makes that big of a difference, but it actually does. Over 8 hands, that's going to be 40 extra chips that you put in the middle every single orbit. Extra $6 in orbit. We bet 1/3 on King Deuce 4 with 2 clubs, and we get check raise very quickly. We do opt to give it up on the flop. We did consider bet 3 betting. We considered floating. However, I found that on PKC specifically, villains are inclined to go ahead and check raise a lot of their top pair hands. So their range is much wider. Their value range is much wider. You're going to be facing bets on the turn more often than not. So calling and floating I have found through a painful experience doesn't exactly work out super well. If you're going to do anything there as far as bluffing or continuing, you can go bet 3-bet, but even there, people don't really love folding top pair, and I found that making people fold top pair is not going to be a super successful strategy. It's going to cause you more pain than it causes you joy. So I just tend to let it go and move on. Table number 1 here, we have the ace king, ye old ace king, and villain opens pretty big. That's like 6x on the button. We 3-bet, pretty easy 3-bet. Villain flats, and now we have king 6-7 with 2 diamonds, and we could go a few different directions. We could check or we could bet. Pretty obvious, right? Like there's only 3. We're not open folding. But I like betting because this is a board that we're expected to bet regardless of our range, which means that villains can float us fairly regularly. And to induce or to make it more likely for villains to float, our sizing should be pretty small. We want villains to call as wide as possible, and if you size up to like half pot or 2/3, you narrow the range that can flat you on the flop. So we don't want to do that. And if you think about it, there's 3K. If we bet 600, there's going to be 3K in the pot. Villain's going to have 2,400. Only 1 bet left. So the turn, we're basically checking our entire range if villain just calls, letting them put the last bet in. And if it goes check, check, then we just shove the river for value. So we can still get stacks in. We just want to make sure to give villain all the opportunities to put as much money in with the weaker parts of his range. With all that being said, we do bet 600, and villain gives us a little tank. Ace king suited on the middle table. Pretty clear 3-bet once again. Villain opts to shove here and shows up with ace king. Like, we're obviously not folding our ace king, but let's think about villain shove. Like, is this a good shove to shove in ace king? Once again, like, I can't call all in with a hand like ace queen. I can't call all in with a hand like jack 10 suited or ace 5 suited. So like when you shove here, the only way to continue the hand is if I have a hand. So I much prefer flatting, just calling and giving me some rope to go ahead and bluff, right? Like, you fold out all the weak hands in my range whenever you shove. So this is a spot that's just a clear call from the ace king. But, you know, like if I have king queen, it doesn't matter. I'm going to shove for value myself, right? They're not going to miss value if I have king queen. So there's not much incentive to shove the ace king. Plus, like, they have ace king. There's only 2 kings left. Like, it's really asking a lot for me to have a king and for them to get paid. So I do not love villain shove here by any stretch of the imagination. And we run out of chop. This ace 5 of hearts hand is probably, it's not probably, it's the most questionable hand of this session. We 3-bet the button, who appears to be a regular type of player. So 3-betting him on the button, he's going to go ahead and 4-bet us, and he 4-bets us very small, giving us 3-1. We need 25% equity, raw equity to continue. However, we are out of position, but we have some depth as well. There's going to be 2,400 in the pot, which is multiple bets post-flop. So there is some wiggle room post-flop. We are going to call and kind of see what develops, see what can happen. And I know this is another point that I'd like to make. Raw equity is not actual equity because you don't get to see all 5 cards. You only get to see 3, then you face a bet, right? But what's often left out of the equation is when you bluff the opponent out because, you know, a board favors your range and they opt to just give up in a 4-bet pot on, like, you know, 7, 8, 9 or something like that, and you pick up the pot. So there is some additional fold equity that you can realize post-flop in spots like this, which is a little bit more incentive to flat, and just a point that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but definitely should be relevant. And we get a monster flop. Bottom pair with the backdoor nut flush draw. I would think that Villain's going to be fairly wide in their 4-betting range here. They're obviously going to have some ace-king in their range, but they may have some suited connectors. They may have some suited aces. So it's not like inconceivable that bottom pair is the best hand here. We're also protected because we flat the 4-bet with hands like ace-queen. We flat the 4-bet with hands like pocket tens. So we have a range, that hits this board pretty well. Villain gives it the 1/3, and I thought that this hand, when I played it, was fairly marginal, but I think flatting is like our only option here. We just have to flat. Villain's not going to be trying to make us fold our ace queens, our king queens, our queen jacks. He's trying to fold out here the parts of our range that completely whiff. And so once we flat the flop, that's going to put Villain on hold for bluffing future streets. He's going to play fairly straightforward, I would imagine. This is not a board where he wants to attack my range super, super wide. So we flat. Effectively knowing that, it can freeze Villain, right? Like if he checks back, then okay, we have the best hand a fair amount of the time. He's going to have some ace jacks, some ace kings in his range, and then some other just random hands. If he bets, I think we're pretty effed. And he flop top set, so I would say that on the effed meter, that's pretty high when Villain flops top set. Now we got a little bit of dead action. 10-5 of clubs on the button in table number 3. Facing a cut-off limp, we go ahead and isolate with a 10 and a 5. Obviously, pretty marginal, but all the greats say you can't make a straight without a 10 or a 5, right? And we got both of them, so just imagine the amounts of straights. It's like an infinite number of straights. We get flatted. With all that said, we get flatted out of the big blind and ace queen 10. So this is obviously for the hand that we have. It's a board. It's obviously going to be a pretty good board for us, being the preflop isolator, but also Villain's going to defend with a bunch of hands that connect with this board. If we bet and Villain folds, he's just folding like no pairs, right? There's really no incentive to bet here. We can protect against like some gutters, like his king X suited that's going to have 7 outs against this and some backdoor flush draws, but like really no incentive for us to bet. Basically checking behind, keeping his range fully intact, and then playing some turns and rivers. And so now here on the 4 of spades, I want to make another point. Like his range is fully intact. So since we check back, he now has every single hand that he defends with out of the big blind facing an ISO, which means our bottom pair or our third pair now is doing quite well against his defending range. He's going to have a lot of suited connectors. He's going to have just a lot of random bluffy type hands that he's going to stab with. So we are going to call, and it's a spot where we just have to call one bet given that we kept Villain's range super wide on the flop. King doesn't change a whole lot for us, probably changes some things for him, specifically that obviously there's a 4-liner out there. And we're going to check back and then call the turn with a lot of hands that have jacks in them. So it makes it a very scary proposition for him to bluff the river. So he checks and we give a check back. And we beat his pocket sixes, which make really no sense betting the turn, but hey, thank you. And now I want to go back and look at this queen jack. This is a bomb pot alert. Queen jack on the button, and this is a spot where so there's a little bit of a glitch right now, a little bit of a bug. So as you can see on PKC, there's 3 blinds. Looking at table number 1, 10, 20, 40, the action starts on the stack that has 4890 in it. So for whatever reason, the engineers of the bomb pot, and this is going to be a bug that gets fixed very soon, I would imagine, the action starts on like the fourth person away from the button. So in this hand, the villain that has 6810 there and the little blonde girl icon, that's where the action actually starts, which is kind of weird. So it goes check, 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 and there's 3 live hands behind me, and for whatever reason, I opted to bet pot because I thought that everybody checked to me. And if everybody's checking on this board, I would assume that nobody really has anything. So it's a good spot to bet. However, half the field hadn't acted. So it's an ambitious bet here. But I did go pot. So I went large. And we got the 3 people to fold that had the highest possibility of having a hand. So we get lucky. Nobody has anything and we pick it up. All right, so now we have the 9-10 of hearts and facing a raise from the hijack. Villain looks somewhat reggy. Obviously, we can 3-bet. I think flatting's good too, especially if the blinds are on the more recreational side, the weaker player side. We can take a flop in position against them as well. If we 3-bet, we likely just force them out. And sort of an interesting situation here. The defender from the straddle opts to lead 2/3 pot into the preflop raiser. Preflop raiser's in pretty ridiculous situation here. Even if he has a hand like aces, where like, do you want to raise when villain bets out 4 ways on 5, 6, 7 with 2 hearts? Do you want to raise, get it in? Probably questionable equity wise, and also you have to worry about me behind, where I'm basically free rolling when I flop a monster and he raises it up to like 1500. Then I can just swoop in, and if I decide to put money in, he's just going to have to fold. So it's a really tricky spot for him. I would expect that most always he's going to be flatting. If he is raising, it's going to be his super high equity hands. It's going to be the times he flops a set, the times he flops a straight, the times that he's got a hand like ace-8 of hearts. Those sort of super high equity hands he's going to raise. His 1-pair hands are most likely always just going to go the safer route and flat the dude that's leading. And this guy definitely puts the time in to consider his decision. We got king 10 of diamonds on table number 1. Table number 2, he eventually opts to flat, and now we can apply the pressure, right? We can raise it up. We can, we have a straight flush draw. No matter what they have, we have great equity. The hand that, the absolute worst hand is the one that I just said, the ace-8 of hearts, in which case, we have the remaining 3 8s, and then we have a 9 or a 10. Actually, no, we just have a 10. So 6 outs is going to be, that's the doom hand that they can have, but it's very specific. Very specifically the ace-8 of hearts. If it's a straight, if it's 8-9, if it's a set, we have great equity, and we know that these guys don't have to have the nuts. We can realize some fold equity here as well. So raising, in my mind, is the clear option. We also, we don't want to overcall and then we turn our flush. There's really no deception there. It's not like we're going to get paid when we do hit, so we may as well take a shot to try to realize some fold equity. And we don't. We don't realize that fold equity, and we don't get villain to shove the flop, which are the 2 things that, we kind of wanted there. We want the preflop, the guy that leads in the preflop raiser, we want him to shove when we raise, so we don't have this awkward situation. And now he's only got half pot size bet left. So it's like, we can't realize fold equity when we shove. If he does have a flush draw, like a bigger flush draw, he's not folding. If he's got a pair and a straight draw, he's not folding. There's just nothing in his range that he's folding. If he's got the nut flush draw, it's like good night moon for us. So checking is the only reasonable action on the turn. So we check back, and we get there. We improve our hand, not in the ways that we would be super happy about. We improve in a way that we make a pair. And then facing villain's check. This pair is likely to be the best hand. If villain has the nut flush draw, maybe he checks it on the river, but some percentage of the time he's going to value bet himself. Some percentage of the time he's going to just shove on the flop. So because sometimes he shoves on the flop and because sometimes he bets here on the river with his pair of aces, that makes it less likely that he actually does have the nut flush draw, and more likely he's got a hand like 7-8, that he's got a hand like 6-8, pocket fours, pocket eights, some sort of pair plus straight draw is the most, those are the most likely candidates for hands that he has, which means our 10 is likely to be the best hand here. And because I'm a value whore, we got to get value here. We got to get value and figure out a sizing that gets called by the hands that we're targeting. And I go a little less than 10% pot. I will say I went a little small. I think I could have gone up to like 600, which is, 1/8 pot. But even still, like when you're betting on the river here for value, don't use 1/3, don't use 1/2. Use the bet that gets called by the range that you're targeting. Give them a great price, even if they're never going to win. And we both know that they're never going to win with those one pair type hands. They still call because they're getting such a great price. Because, well, if I'm right, 8% of the time, then I have to call. They're not going to be right 8% of the time, but who cares? Put in the value bet. It's an extra $50. And at the end of the day, that $50 adds up over time. And we did get called by a little 7-9 action. Little top pair with a gutter leading into the pre-flop razor action. And now we find ourselves with pocket 10s in middle position, or in the hijack on table number 2. We are, of course, going to open pocket 10s because they're a damn good hand. There we go. Took me long enough to open. And if the small blind in this spot or the straddle 3-bets us, we're likely to just flat, playing about 250 straddles deep with the straddle, the big blind flatting. Depending on the type of player he is, it's going to depend on what his flatting range is, right? Maybe ace jack off, maybe ace 10, maybe some king queen, maybe some suited connectors, maybe some pocket pairs, maybe some suited aces. Depending on his 3-bet frequency, his range is likely to include all of those. We could c-bet the flop. I mean, we flop an overpair, and maybe c-bet is preferable and a more profitable play over time. I do like mixing in, throwing in some check backs here when we can keep villain's range super wide, and then we can get some calls because we want to protect our range as well. And if we bet here with all of our overpairs, if we bet here with all of our flush draws, if we bet here with all of our good hands, when we check back, they can kind of print money by just auto betting versus check. So we opted to check back here and use a little bit of a mixed strategy. If villain is on the more recreational side, then I would just say you don't need to. It's really unnecessary. They're not going to exploit you in the way that you're protecting against. And if they're not going to exploit you in the way that you're protecting against, then kind of what's the point, right? But they do bet 2/3 and we call. Now the river is the queen of spades. Obviously a good card because it makes it less likely that they have a queen themselves. And also because this is not a card that they're going to bluff at with a high regularity, because they know that when we check back and then we call, we're going to have a lot of queens in our range too. So, they're not going to bluff because they're afraid of running into trips. And also because we just flat the turn, we're looking a little bit like we have some sort of marginal showdown value hand, or that we picked up some sort of flush draw, or that we have a queen. So I do opt to go 2/3 here on the river. I don't really like the sizing because we have so many queens in our range. I think we need to size down and do exactly what I just talked about in the 9-10 hand. target the parts of villain's range that is a bunch of one pair type things that can go for a hero call. And this hand to me is super interesting and sets up a hand that will happen in the future. This 7-8 hand is a bomb pot, so everybody's involved. We got the bottom end straight draw, and villain leads 1/3 8 ways, which is very curious sizing. Honestly, curious is not the right word. I just think it's a bad sizing. You shouldn't really have a 1/3 sizing on this board, even if you have top set. Everybody with a straight draw is going to call. You're just going to want to size up and get value. If you got top 2 pair, if you got bottom set, whatever it is. If you have bottom set, people are going to have more top pairs. So bet half pot or 66% pot. I don't see that 1/3 pot being super value heavy. With that said, I did not raise the flop. I wanted to call because he bet so small. I wanted to realize my equity. And then we get this turn, which is obviously not ideal. But I will say, for the dude that overcalled, like, he's not going to have a lot of full houses. He's not going to have a lot of sets in his range either, because those are all going to be raising the flop, that 1/3 bet, especially once I call. Like, if they did go for, actually, they were last to act, so they never had an action. But I do end up folding the turn, and I folded the turn when the 9 paired because I was a little concerned that the original better could have a full house. Like, I ignored my read, the 1/3 bet on the flop, and just thought, sometimes guys will just use pretty poor sizings, and maybe that's the case here. So I did fold the turn because I was a little confused. I didn't want to be drawing dead to the bottom end of a straight. If villain has like Jack 9, either villain has Jack 9, for instance, on the turn, then this cuts my outs in half. And I also get crushed like on this river specifically, where I make a straight and they make a full house. So very curious. It was very curious to me what these guys are doing this with, like what both of them have. So I paid the $20. It's not dollars, it's RMB, about $3 to expose everybody's cards. And it was quite interesting seeing what everybody had, because these are some interesting hands. Guy led 1/3 8 ways with a 9 deuce, so middle pair. That's something to put in the memory bank. The caller had Jack 8, so a straight draw, which is obviously reasonable to call the flop with. Leading when the 9 pairs, I have no earthly idea what that's about. And then look at the dude who's on the button. He flopped bottom 2 pair. Like, he folded the flop 1/3 pot size bet with bottom 2 pair and turned a full house. Like, and he was in the pot because it was a bomb pot and everybody was in the pot. So like, there is a ton of value, I think, in these bomb pots, just because people are going to play them poorly. And the more recreationally that the players are, the more poorly they're going to play them. So do some bomb pot battling. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of anything that throws in some sort of element to poker that everybody hasn't just studied to death, and it makes the game more gambly. And when there's less information for people to find online about how to play in specific spots, the bigger your edge is just going to be naturally. That's just how poker works, right? And the 3-4 suited opening on the button, ace 4 of diamonds and a bomb pot on table number 3. Didn't flop very well on table number 3. We do c-bet with our bottom pair, and this is, we're denying equity. We're continuation betting. Any card on the turn that's not a 3 or 4 is going to put us in a spot. So we opt to bet and deny equity, and villain, just like in the Jack 8 hand, flats the flop and then leads into us on the turn. I have no idea. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know what they're doing. Just clicking buttons, I guess. Table number 1, queens. We're obviously going to be 3-betting here, and I do want to just go back 1 second. Villain has a 46% VPIP, win rate 55%. Okay, that doesn't tell us a ton. But we go ahead and 3-bet it, and we go about 4x with our 3-bet. Villain's playing like 125 straddle stack. So 3-bet, reasonable size. If Villain's playing a smaller stack, my 3-bet size tends to drop and go down just because they're shallower and we can get the money in. And when I have my 3-bet bluffs, I want to keep it on the smaller side so that, when they shove, I lose less money. And also, they don't peel a ton with super small stacks. So when they get it in, obviously, and they just get it in. They're just not gonna flat that often when they have a short stack. But I do want to talk about this board. So Jack 7-4 as the preflop 3-better. There's about 2 bets left. A bet on the flop and then a bet on the turn. And we have an overpair, right? Which is a good hand. They call that a good hand. It's a profitable hand in this spot. We can obviously get called by all of Villain's Jack X's. However, the question becomes, do Villain's Jack X's start betting for value when they face a check? And my answer to that is I think they do. A lot of times if they have Ace Jack or King Jack here, they're going to bet because they're going to believe that we bet our value. We bet our sets of jacks and sets of eights, those are like the hands, the value hands they expect to check. But like aces through queens, they're going to think that we go ahead and value bet those. When we go into check call mode, we can rep 9s, we can rep 10s, we can rep like 8-9 suited or ace-8 suited. So by checking, we rep a much weaker range. And if Villain has just some total air balls, again, we want to give them a chance to put some money in the pot. Like, let Villains put money in the pot when they have a bunch of bluffs in their range. If we bet here and Villain has a bluff, like we bet 1,200, what are they going to do if they have ace-10? Like, they're just going to fold. They have no option other than folding. But if we check, then they start, the wheels start turning, right? Like, oh, if all their value bets and they check and now I can't win, the only way for me to win is to bet. So they start getting a little moving into attack mode. So calling here, now there's 1 bet left. There's 31, Villain has 3180. There's 3,600 in the pot. Turn is, pretty brickish 5. And we once again check, and we're giving Villain the option to put the last bet in once again. And think about this too on the flop. If it goes check, check, and the turn is a 5, we can still go bet, bet, and the money gets in. Like, we still have the opportunity to get all the money in. We don't lose that by checking the flop. What we gain is the opportunity for the Villain to put in money when they have a pretty bad hand. So obviously we call, and Villain shows up with a 5-6 of clubs. So he flopped a gutter and turned a 5 and then opted to turn that 5 into a bluff. I'm assuming to fold out, my middle pairs or my hands like 9s and 10s. And it just makes it a very, very easy call on the turn. And we hold for the river. Hooray us. Hooray. Hooray for us holding on the river. But this creates this, those spots specifically, and I talk to my students a lot about this, is like when you're running bad and you keep running into the top of people's ranges, like a lot of times you manufacture those situations just based on how you play the hand. Like you bet 2/3 there. Well, yeah, Villain's going to need the top of his range in order to continue. When you check, you keep his range super wide. You keep his range at, his 3-bet flatting range, which is obviously going to be much wider than the range that he decides to continue with when you make a big bet. So you're facing weaker ranges. And this is a part of the game that's just so important that a lot of people get wrong. If you're running into the nuts with regularity over and over and over again, think about the process that gets you there. Are you playing your hands in a way that the only way you're going to get action is when Villains beat you? And if you are, you can't be surprised when you keep running into it over and over and over again because it's a self-created situation. Now we got the little King 4 ball on table number 2. Spoiler alert, we're going to get involved. We're going to get involved with Mr. King 4. I think King 4 is a good squeeze here. Like, it's a good candidate for a squeeze. It's not a hand that's like super amazing that you want to realize equity. You don't want to lose your ability to realize equity. It's also a good flat, getting 3.8 to 1. You need about 20% raw equity to continue. And this is a high equity flop for a king and a 4. This is a pretty good one. A really good flop that does not give us a pair. Second nut flush draw with a gutter. And then it checks through. So the flop checking through, like pre-flop razor checks and then the button checks. And this caps both of their ranges. So they're not going to have a lot of two pair. They're not going to have straights. It's just really hard for them to have very much. So when sizing here, we want to attack those ranges by using a bigger sizing that just lets us realize our fold equity versus these guys who very likely have crappy hands. And because of the capped ranges, because of the check back on the flop, I would say if the button decides to flat and the river is a brick, if the river is a 6, 5, 4, 3, or 2, then pairs the 9, pairs the 10, pairs the queen, then we're going to go for it on the river as well. We're going to make a large river bet and just continue repping all the hands that they can't have. 7-8 of hearts on table number 3. Start by opening 4x at 10, 20, 40 with a 10 chip ante. The button gives us a 3-bet, relatively small 3-bet, little more than 3x. Stats: 41 VPIP, 50% win rate. Nothing super special, or it doesn't really tell us very much. All we know is we got 150 straddles. Depth: we have a pretty good hand with the 7 and an 8. We're in the cutoff. The button 3-bet us. We could really 4-bet here. Like 4-betting is not completely out of the question because button's range should be fairly wide with his 3-betting. But because he gave us a great price, or he or she gave us a great price, we peel out of position and we get this flop, which is, again, about as good as it gets without having a pair. Pretty much a theme for this PKC training video. Facing a half pot size bet, we're just going to raise it up, get the money in, try to realize fold equity. When villain has, their ace kings, their ace queens, maybe a pocket tens type hand, just try to realize some fold equity, and if we get it in, we get it in. The hands we don't want to see, like a jack 10 of hearts would be, again, that's a doom hand. So getting it in for about a $2,000 US pot. Villain has kings. All we got to do is hit, right? Like, that's pretty easy. There are a lot of cards in the deck that give us a good hand. Just a little, 10 of hearts ball. 10 of hearts ball and take down 25% of that jackpot up there, the 40,000 chips, and we're good to go. Villain tanked longer for the insurance, for whether or not they wanted to take the insurance than they did with the kings. Very tricky spot for them. We turn even more outs with a pair. Now we got a 7, an 8, a 10, a 5, a heart. I don't know. Are there any cards in the deck that don't improve us? Oh, yeah. The four of clubs that quickly sped away there. That's a hand. Let's go back. Okay, so obviously that hand was a very major hand in the session. We lost with our straight flush draw. Moving on, we have the queen 5 of spades here. This is another bomb pot on table number 2. And we start the action out by checking. This is very important because effectively, we're under the gun. So we check. And then this dude who bet the 1/3 earlier with his 9 and deuce on 9, 10, 4, he goes ahead and he uses about the same sizing, 1/3, 8 ways. And this is super pivotal that we paid the 20 chips to see what villain was doing that with, because now we know, we have an idea. And these 3 guys that are the only people that haven't acted yet. And the 2 people that have already checked, we can make a pretty good assumption that they don't have that strong of a hand in this bomb pot, because it's like a limp pot mentality. So what I'm saying is this is like prime pickings to put in a raise with our middle pair and just deny the equity of the dude that's going to be betting way too often on the button. So because we paid the chips to see what villain had previously, we go ahead and raise. And I will say this raise sizing is just not great. We should have gone 1600. We can get the same accomplished by going smaller and risking less, but we clicked the button and the button was 2200. We should have gone less, but you know what? Either way, the thing to do is raise there because of what we know. Villain laughs at us. That's fine. And hits us in the face with a tomato. That's okay. We can live. We can live with getting laughed at and hit in the face with a tomato when we have the ability to take down some bomb pots uncontested when villains have betting patterns and are just betting way too frequently. The 6-9 suited is another bomb pot hand. And what the sense that I'm getting in these bomb pots is, like I just said, they're playing them kind of like limp pots, right? Where they don't go for tons of check raises. They bet out a lot with their value. And when it checks through, they just don't have that strong of hands. On the queen, I opted not to bet because the queen can obviously improve a bunch of people's hands, and we're going to have to use 2 bets to make them fold. So we'll have to, bet 700 here, and likely there will be 2,500 in the pot. There's a double flush draw board. We're going to have to bet, probably overbet, like a 3,200 chip bet on the river. So we opt to go for the more conservative route with our 9 high and not bluff 7 other people out of the pot. But it just gives you an inkling, a little insight into how people are going to play these bomb pots on PKC. And if you play live, how people are going to be playing these bomb pots live. Look for betting patterns, look for frequency, look for, think about the people that are going to bet out because they're afraid their hand's going to get cracked. When these people check, their checking range is severely imbalanced. Their check is very straightforward, and it means that they're going to fold. So really use this information, leverage it to the best of your ability. Ensure that if these guys are checking, you're exploiting their checking range and making the most of these opportunities, because there's a lot of money out here, right? Like there's eight straddles a piece. There's, that's 64 straddles. That's a lot, or eight big blinds. So 32 straddles. There's a lot to be gained in these pots. The 8-10 of hearts, we flatted. We can obviously 3-bet the 8-10 of hearts. We can squeeze it. And now we have a double gut shot with the backdoor flush draw. Villain's betting half pot 4 ways. I don't think he's going to be betting super wide on this board. However, 8-10 of hearts is just a great candidate to go ahead and raise it up. Villain's almost never going to be 3-betting us here unless they have it, unless they flop a set of 6s or a set of 7s. If they have aces, they're not just going to be willy-nilly 3-betting, getting it in with 200 straddles. So when we raise, we get to realize some fold equity, and we don't blow ourselves off of our actual equity, which is the fear of raising in some of these spots where you raise, villain shoves, your equity gets denied, you hate life, you eat too much chocolate, you gain a bunch of weight, and then your hair starts falling out, and basically life falls apart because all your equity got denied, and it was very, very sad. Thank you very much for watching this PKC training video. I'm Coach Brad Wilson of EnhanceYourEdge.com. Don't forget to give us a little subscribe, and also check out Chasing Poker Greatness, the podcast, available wherever it is that you consume podcasts. I have interviews with just amazing human beings involved in the poker world who drop greatness bombs all over the place, just share amazing insights and knowledge. Be sure to go ahead and do that, and also play on PKC, EnhanceYourEdge.com/PKC. Get your exclusive sign-up code, jump into the streets. The water's warm. Y'all take care, and I'll see you next time.